If you're a follower of Jesus, you probably know you're supposed to pray. But why? Let's talk about it on 3-Minute Theology. First, let's clarify what is prayer. Simply put, it's the way we communicate with God. And when we think about prayer as a spiritual practice, it's setting aside dedicated time to intentionally communicate with God. But it's not just talking to God. I believe He actually wants to speak to us too, and that's where the power of prayer comes from, in my opinion. If you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you've probably felt the slight guilt that comes when you think about prayer, probably because we all feel like we should be praying more. And yet, if we're honest, it can be hard to find the time to pray, and when we do, it can be hard to focus. And so for many, prayer just isn't enjoyable. Yet for Jesus, it was a central practice in His life, and He seemed to really enjoy it, so much so that His disciples asked Him to teach them to pray like He did, even though they came from a background that was well-versed in prayer. So if Jesus enjoyed it, what's the disconnect for us? Well, I think it's all tied to understanding that our experience in prayer changes over time as we mature. We can divide this changing process into 4 stages. And this is just a process most people go through. Number 1, talking to God using the words of others. Number 2, talking to God using your own words. Number 3, learning to hear God's voice. And I think that our frustrations or lack of interest in prayer might come from never getting to this place where we hear the voice of God. Finally, number 4, simply being with God. When we first learn to pray, there's a progression from one stage to the next. But our spiritual journey is not linear. So really, these 4 stages are more like layers that build on each other. And the more experienced you are in prayer, the more the stages all blend together. But we also tend to start praying things other people have written, like what we read throughout the Bible, like the Lord's Prayer in Luke 11 or the Psalms. And I get that it can feel disingenuous to pray someone else's prayers, but believers have been doing it for generations, so you are in good company. But then eventually we start talking to God in our own words, where we basically share with Him what's on our mind. These prayers typically take on 3 forms. 1, gratitude, which is talking with God about what is good in your life. Number 2, lament, which is talking with God about what's bad in your life. And if bringing your frustrations to God seems wrong, just read the Psalms. Scholars state that around 2/3 of the Psalms are lament. I've shared about this before, but God is not offended by our honesty. And finally, number 3, petition, which is simply asking God to fulfill His promises in specific areas of our life. But then we get to what I think is one of the most important things a disciple of Jesus can do: learn to hear and discern God's voice. And I want to talk more about that in our next video. But until then, if prayer isn't a regular practice in your life, I want to encourage you to start the journey. Prayer is powerful. There's actually research now that indicates that prayer can have a positive impact on your mental health. Now, of course, the Bible told us that a long time ago in Philippians 4:6-7, but it's amazing that we're now seeing it proven scientifically. So begin a regular daily practice of prayer. Spend a few minutes a day or throughout the day praying. Start by praying using the words of others. Then over time, start expressing gratitude, lament, and petition. In our next video, we'll talk more about learning how to hear what God wants to say to us. Until next time.